Schneider. He's a Long Island native. He's here to talk about his book, Manhattan Cult Story. And so we're going to do a little talk, and then we'll do a Q&A for anybody that has questions. I don't know if everybody's read the book or if they're halfway through or looking to read it, but well, you know, we have some books for sale after the program is long. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Coming out cold night, so I appreciate it. It's really nice to see everybody. And Jessica, thanks for having me here. It's really nice. I'll talk a little bit about like my story and the book, and then, you know, please ask a lot of questions and whatnot. But I will say this. So the book is about the 23 years I spent in a very secret cult. I mean, I didn't consider it a cult. I considered it to be a philosophy group, pretty much. And that's what I thought I was going to a class for when I was 29. You know, it ended up taking over my life in a way that I could never have imagined. You know, the other people who were in the group were like, you know, folks in this room, you know, you all read, right? We know that. Educated and, you know, I don't see anybody with like, you know, looks like a terrorist or, you know what I mean, like a fundamentalist type of person here. I could be wrong, of course, but, you know, like normal folks that you would expect. So that's what I saw when I went into the room for the first time. And, you know, there are other people like me. I was a young lawyer, other professionals, you know, highly educated people who you'd never expect to be in an organization that would be so dangerous. Most importantly, you wouldn't expect these people to be taken advantage of and deluded. And that was in fact the case. I trusted the person who brought me, and that's how I got involved. So the question that I always get is, well, how the hell, you know, if you're such a smart guy, how come you got suckered into this? Or how do smart people, allegedly smart people, sophisticated people that we all think we are to some degree, get involved in something like that? And I'll tell you, it's very common. Today, you know, that's why I have this up here. Today, I just heard on the way over, and I saw it in the news here. There were two business events. One was the conviction of Elizabeth Holmes, who was the leader of Theranos. She was convicted of misleading investors, raising over $1 billion from super duper smart, savvy investors. And it wasn't a one-time pop. It was years. She came up with this, most of you know, this product which was designed to you know, take a blood test, you know, with just a small speck of blood and figure out, oh, if they had all these kinds of diseases. Now, you all could think and that, you know, just figure out that that's probably absurd. Her job as a, you know, trickster was to convince people that it worked. And she convinced some smart people. This week, there's another story of this guy who ran FTX, the cryptocurrency exchange, had no controls whatsoever. They don't know where the money is, and you had some of the biggest investors in the world putting money into this thing. So how do smart people get suckered into things like this? Mine is a bit more of an extreme story in certain ways because it really took over my life, all aspects of my life. But that's really why I wrote the book, among other reasons, was to really lay out how I got pulled into it, and to be as brutally honest as I could about me, you know, where I missed things that other people might have, or where I missed things that anybody would miss. Because I was very suspicious about it. And so really it's not so much about me, so to speak, but more about the kind of people who perpetuate frauds and lie to people for their own purposes, which was not apparent for quite some time. So that's really why I wrote the book. I also wanted to expose it because it's a secret group, and I'll get into that a little bit more if if you want me to describe it, what the group was about. So, like I say, I joined it in 1989. I was 29. I was an attorney. I was working for a big law firm in New York. And, I came from an affluent family in Long Island. I was wanting for nothing. I had everything I needed. I had great friends. The last person who would join, well, let me back up. Wasn't spiritual. I have a Jewish background, secular, but not religious. I had a bar mitzvah, but not at all religious. I had no spiritual interest whatsoever. But there was one thing that I did miss, which was studying. I loved college. I hated law school, but I loved college. I loved reading philosophy. And I was getting burnt out at 29 from working so much. I was looking for other things to do in my life. I started playing in a band. And sure enough, I met this guy who befriended me. He was a Ivy educated architect, bright guy, took great interest in me. Wasn't sure what he was interested about, but I was a little suspicious because he, wanted to get together a lot and wasn't quite sure where he was coming from. Eventually, he told me that he was a member of a group that studied a philosopher named Gurdjieff, and that it was a big secret, and that it was meeting in New York, and would I be interested in going? I immediately stormed out because it sounded like a cult. I was pretty offended that he would think I would want to join something shady. Eventually, he convinced me to attend a meeting, and I didn't think much of it. Like I say, it was a group of, folks like us, and they sat around, not unlike this, with two leaders sitting in directors' chairs. But the only difference was that they were being tended on by other people. It was kind of strange, And they were talking about Gurdjieff. I didn't really understand it. But the vibe was, I don't know, has anybody ever been to like 12-step or AA or things like that? It's a very serious and almost spiritual, solemn vibe, where people feel like they're getting something. And I wasn't looking for anything, really. At least I didn't think so. But what they did have, which I found out over time, was a community of people who were unlike anything else that I experienced, in that it was secret. We were sworn to secrecy. We weren't able to speak to anyone outside of the group. So you could only speak, you couldn't tell anyone outside of the group that you were in this group. But I couldn't talk to you afterwards, after class. That would be it. Could only speak to people in class. You can't exchange phone numbers. You didn't know people's last names. And some people, I think, thought that was weird and they didn't stay. I thought that was kind of cool. I thought, that's interesting, this is a safe place, I could talk about my life, and people did. And I would say the first year was very profound. I made these friendships with people. We would bring in questions. We met twice a week at night in Lower Manhattan. Bring in questions about our life, and the teachers would give advice. The teachers were people who were just a few years older than us, one thing that happened to me was that I started my own law practice, and I got a certain support talking about it, coming to class. We called it class, coming to class twice a week. So it was like a support group in a way as well. It changed once we met the leader of the group. Now, let me say one other thing. we weren't allowed to ask questions about like the history of the group. We weren't told anything about the history of the group. There was no internet in 1989. There was no way to know about these people because I only knew their last names, and the whole thing was called school. And we met a place called The Space, and we studied the work. So these were all just like, you know, all these red flags going on all over the place, folks, right? But not to me. They weren't. And as I explained in the book, there was a very sophisticated recruiting method that was used to locate people like me to join the group. People who were, you know, in their 20s, affluent, maybe at a crossroads in their life, maybe not happy about things, maybe overworked, missing a partner. I didn't have a girlfriend at the time. You know, there was very specific criteria of what they were looking for, and they recruited people surreptitiously, which I go through in the book, and eventually I became one of the recruiters. Like we all did recruiting. The group was led by a woman named Sharon Gans, who we didn't meet for a year until we were in the group. She was an actress from New York, was living in San Francisco, came back to New York and started this group. There were probably a few thousand people in the group through the years. The classes were about 50 or 60 people, but people came and went through the years. There are some people who've been there 50 years, some people stayed for 5 nights. But most people, if they stay a year, will stay multi years. Once you leave the group, you're ostracized. And there were a lot of families that were created in the group. So I had a marriage with somebody else in the group. That happened a lot. There were many other sort of like arranged marriages like what I had. There are folks who came in who were married and those marriages ended. In other words, they were married to somebody outside the group, and those marriages usually ended because we weren't allowed to speak to the people outside to tell them where we were going. So, like, men were told to tell their wives, you know, I'm going out and it's none of your business where I'm going. That's not very helpful for a marriage. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And we saw, you know, a number of marriages end because of that. And they were seeking to do that because they wanted us to become isolated. So I realize I'm kind of scratching the surface here. There's so much more I can say, and I kind of want to open it up to questions because then I'll explain more. But I just want to add more to this, which is that the leaders, I'm just going to say bluntly, were criminals. We all paid a few $100s a month in cash. Once I got out, or towards the end of my tenure, I got out 10 years ago, this month, or next month, actually. They didn't pay their taxes. They engaged in forced labor. We did a lot of construction work. We were always doing recruiting, which took many, many hours. There was sexual abuse of men and women, a lot more before I got there, but there was coercive situations that I witnessed, that people were put in these very horrible situations. And Sharon just terrorized people, humiliated them, and was a classic cult leader, which I did not really get until I left. Because we would spend a lot of time talking about how the group was legitimate and that this sort of tough love was very important for our development. And ultimately, what the tough love was to always second guess your own better judgment and have it substituted by somebody else. So I don't know, there's a lot of cult documentaries. There's The Vow, and there's a bunch of them, and they're all very similar. Sarah Edmondson, who was in The Vow, was kind enough to read and review my book, and is a great. She was the main whistleblower of Nexium. When she read my book, she called and said, gee, I wonder if Keith Raniere was involved in, your group, because his tactics were so similar. And I have noticed, other books about cults and whatnot, that the leaders are very similar. We have elected leaders who are, have this sort of cult of personality. What is that all about? And that's a big question that I've, had, and I try to pose to the reader. So, why else did I write the book? I wanted to expose them. I wanted to tell my story so people could relate to like getting involved in some kind of situation like this. It doesn't have to be extreme like a cult. It could be just any kind of abusive one-on-one relationship where, you're gaslighted or just, but it's also about, luckily how I got out and, resilience. I never wrote before. I'm a lawyer. I don't write for a living other than writing arguments and stuff. So it was a new kind of experience to write like that. I read a lot of memoirs, some great books. I spent a lot of time in the East. I live in East Hampton, so I spent a lot of time writing the book, mostly in the East Hampton Library. Next time I write, I'll come to Shelter Island. This is a great library. It's a great library, which I've never been to before. But it took about about 4 months to write it, and then there was editing for a couple of years. And I found a publisher really by luck. I tried, very hard to get a book published. It's like getting struck by lightning, and it really is. And I just, couldn't get a literary agent, but someone knew the publisher, the owner of Skyhorse, who I met, and he read 20 pages and he liked it. He was like, I'm into cults. So he bought the book, and that was it. So I was very lucky that it came out, and that's all I have to say. I think. I could probably say more, but why don't you ask me questions?
Was your class part of contact other classes, part of a larger organization?
Yeah. So it was part of this single organization, which really doesn't have a name. It's been called Odyssey Study Group in the or OSG. So OSG was run by Sharon Gans, and she had in New York about 4 or 5 separate classes that met at the same place at different times, but she kept them entirely separated. And then in Boston, there were 2 or 3 groups also under her auspices, and then she had a group in Copenhagen for a while.
And no annual get together.
Oh, the whole groups?
Yeah.
No, she kept everything separate.
Right.
And I should say that no one has written about this group.
Wow.
No one has spoken about it. There's a blog. I have a blog, and there's one other blog. Her name is not even really on the blog, and people are just afraid to talk about it.
I read Gurdjieff back in the 70s.
Yeah.
So how much was that part of this? Or was it mostly students?
It was all Gurdjieff and
Oh, yeah?
Ouspensky, yeah. The group still operates now. They've kind of changed their name, and they don't say that they study Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, but they do. But yeah, I mean, it's a Gurdjieff group. So for those who don't know, Gurdjieff was sort of a Russian mystic who had these esoteric schools, and he wrote, he wrote a bunch of books, but the main book about him is called In Search of the Miraculous by Peter Spensky, who was one of his disciples. And the fourth way teaching was created by Gurdjieff, he says, based upon Eastern philosophy, combining it to Western philosophy. And there's a lot of Christianity in it, a lot of Christian principles, but it's esoteric, meaning the deeper meanings of Christianity and other religions. And the concept basically is that civilization is asleep, and we're in waking humanity, and is that what it is? Yeah, sleeping humanity. Sorry, sleeping humanity. We live in. That's why there's wars, and that's why there's destruction. And this pitch worked really good during the wars in Europe. I mean, this was a hot thing, and a lot of intellectuals followed this. And he said the only way to awaken was to join an esoteric school, which he claimed he had. And he had a number of groups that met. I guess, where did they meet? But they eventually met in France and in England and in the United States. And Spensky was one of his disciples, and there were a number of other disciples. Sharon Gans and Alex Horn, who started my group, had no connection with any of these people, but claimed they did.
Hi,
Yeah.
So I'm 31, just finished law school. So.
Congratulations.
And I'm studying for the bar, but I totally want to give you a hug right now because I'm feeling what you're throwing out, because when I was first in college and undergrad doing mechanical engineering, I kind of had my first touch of cult theory, which was the pyramid scheme. And it was my boyfriend was in on it, and he wanted me to get in on it. And he's like, you got to get up to rubles and then diamonds, and what you want is the sapphire, and if you're all the way at the top of the sapphire, you're like king. And you had to sell all this stuff to get up, but nobody actually ever got up that high. It was just like 3 people were the only people of this pyramid scheme. And I was like, okay, and I was too young to actually know what was going on. And so then I was like, okay, moved past that, kind of realized this is not normal, people, pyramid schemes. And I didn't know anything about it at the time in college. Then I entered, just before my first year of law school, I met an actor actually out here. And I'm from Ohio, and I just moved here permanently to Shelter Island. But at the time, we met out in Long Island, became very close friends, and had a very, very close friendship, and would share with him, hey, I'm so worried about law school and people liking me, and it seems hard. And I just felt a little outcasted. So I think it was like a year or two into our, knowing each other, he said, I want to try to give you some power and give you power back to you. And I have people who love you. And so I went to these meetings with the Big S facility in Manhattan. And I didn't know what it was at the time, but all of the hairs on my neck just stood up because everybody was like really creepy and really weird, and they all acted funny. There's like nothing, they like robots that were trying to act human. I guess is the best way I can put it. So I was like, hey, I don't feel really comfortable. After going to 2 to 3 meetings, I was like, oh, this just doesn't seem normal. I don't think people behave like this. So then I said, I really think this is great for you, but it's not for me. I wish not to do it anymore. Come to find out later, it was, Scientology. I was like, oh, yeah, and I was like, oh my God. And I didn't know anything about it until 6 years later. And I was like, oh my gosh, what could I almost got myself into? And I had technology back then. I could have researched, but it was the same thing that you were talking about. I don't think they did last names. They just did first names, which was really complicated because they all seemed to have the first names. A lot of people were living within the facility, which was really strange to me. And he was just like all of these celebrities coming out of nowhere, like, hey, like, how can I support you? Law is great. Like, you should go to this, go to this law firm, do internship here. I'm like, you don't know me. And he's like, but we know your friend. So, and your family because of him. So it was just one of those things with technology being present, being 31 years old, and you saying you didn't have technology back then. what kind of awareness or warning signals with all the digital we have available and, you know, computers that you would suggest that we should maybe research or look into before, you know, maybe saying, hey, let's go to this meeting, even though it could be like one of your best friends?
Right. Well, I mean, it's, again, I come back to it as a con. You know, I could tell you what, like, for a cult, you know, these kind of spiritual groups, how some might be a cult and some are probably totally legitimate, you know. And I think there's a very clear line. But getting conned is like, you know, it just happens all the time. I mean, there's not a single person in this room who hasn't been lied to and hasn't fallen for it. Depends on the level of it. I fell for a big one, and for a long time. And I spend my time as a lawyer fighting for people who've been conned, or sometimes defending people who have conned. You know, it's just part of it. And I was just telling you that, you know, Elizabeth Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, and, you know, these, it just goes on all the time. But okay, so for spiritual groups, things like that, I have a very specific thing in mind that I think delineates them. And I've argued about it, I've tested it out with lots of people, because a lot of people say, hey, wait, you know, wouldn't that cover a religion? I'm like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't cover religion, it doesn't cover a lot of things. So the first thing is, well, the major overview is that if you're involved in something that it is coercive, and that there's coercive elements going on, making you do things that you otherwise wouldn't do, and that somebody's benefiting from that.
Paying a lot of money.
Yeah, you know, like, oh well, going to college, that costs a lot of money, but is there like one leader there who is enforcing crazy rules and is sleeping with people and, you know, is a cult personality and everybody, you know, venerates? That's not clearly that kind of situation.
Right.
You know, it's beneficial, you get a lot from it. But in my group, you know, we had a very strong leader. She collected a lot of money. She took advantage of people. If you left, you were shunned. You know, there was no dissent, and you were always wrong. I mean, there's a bunch of things. I kind of wrote about that at the end of the book. I have like this sort of 9 hallmark.
What made you want to stay then?
Why did I want to stay?
Yeah.
Right.
Because I'm hearing so much negative about the group.
Okay.
What
Well,
could
this
make
is
you want to
why
stay?
I should have shut up sooner, then you could have asked me that sooner. But that's the thing. That's the other thing I wanted to talk about in my book and explain that. And so I loved the community at first. Although the leaders were harsh and could sometimes be harsh against us, sometimes they could be very loving. So you never knew really where you stood. But overall, I found you know, great deal of community and friendship and support. I also met my wife, my then wife, ex-wife there, and I eventually began to work. I had a client who was in the cult, and all those relationships end if you leave. So I would say for the first half of my time being in the cult, I liked it. You know, I had these friendships. We did. We had these parties. We had that were very special and very unique. We really thought we were saving the world in a way as well. I mean, that was part of the philosophy. But it changed. There was a very sudden shift rather, that happened about halfway through. And the only reason I didn't leave after that was because I was really stuck. I was in a marriage that if I left, my marriage would have ended. I didn't want that to happen. I didn't want to lose the few friends that I had still left. And, you know, I was so hypnotized into believing that without the group, I would not have any kind of decent life. It's a pattern that you see with abused spouses.
That's exactly what
That's just what I said.
Yeah, right
Just
now.
what I- yeah.
Was the only enforcement mechanism expulsion from the group?
Pretty much. Now, there was public humiliation. So you come in, you'd be in a big room with your friends, and then you could be humiliated. And no one would stand up for this guy. We'd be all jumping on him.
Were you ever in fear when you left?
Yes. I was pretty sure that, I didn't think I had much longer to live. I just didn't want to live. I was, suicidal. I wasn't afraid of them so much. I was afraid that now that I was out in the wilderness, as it were, that I would have no meaning left in my life.
You were wrong.
I was wrong, yeah.
What methods of coercion did they use to keep people from talking afterwards?
Well, it was voluntary at first, that you can't speak about it. And that was a condition of membership.
Right, but once it's gone.
Once you're gone? Oh, I see, once you're gone.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a very good question. And it's one that it puzzles me because I have no problem talking about it to anybody. I have no problem. I don't know, something's wrong with me maybe, I don't know. But no, I'm kidding. The reason people don't talk, I think, and I've spoken to a lot of people in the group, and like, why won't you put your name on it? Or would you be willing to talk in front of a camera?
Still in the group?
No, people who have left won't
Okay.
talk about it because of shame, humiliation, and there's still a fear of retribution somehow. There's a fear that, so-and-so, he had a gun and, he'll use it on me and all of this kind of stuff.
Were physical
They
assaults ever happening?
never. Well, they did to people who were in the group, but never outside of the group. So it's kind of like the best example, the best similarity are, women who have been abused. People don't believe them, because 20 years later they said, I was raped. Well, why didn't you say anything? Or the kids who were abused by priests, why didn't you say anything? So Sharon and these other leaders in the group, they had an amazing gift for making people feel ashamed.
How many years were you in?
23.
You were in the group for 23 years.
Yeah.
And you say about halfway through is when you started to feel, was there any event that you can point to as
Chapter 12, it's in chapter 12. I don't know what chapter, but it was about 12 years in. So yeah, there was definitely a turning point where it really turned on its head and it got crazy. And it became very clear and really, there was a lot of inner struggle that I had to deal with. It was all like, well, do I double down and, get more into this or do I back away? And I had a wife. Without giving too much of it away, my wife wanted to stay in it.
Right.
And I didn't want to lose the marriage.
Did you talk with other ex-members at that time?
No, we weren't allowed to. We wouldn't. We were afraid to. I had some who contacted me, and I would not want to talk to them. Because they were, it's in all these cults. They do the same thing. They're called, whatever.
Did the organization legally marry you and your wife?
No.
So when you got married, was there any weird, like?
It didn't.
There wasn't like the Sun Myung Mooney mass wedding, but there were many, many couples set up. Sharon was early on in the group in San Francisco, because they started in San Francisco. She would tell people, look, you two need to get married or all the women here, if you don't get married, my husband is going to be sleeping with you.
Ooh.
For his and your own development. Now that kind of stuff I didn't witness, Sharon telling people to sleep with her husband, that kind of ended by the time I joined. If I saw that, I don't think I would have stayed. Instead, I did see, hey, it's time to get married. Have you thought about doing that? And then with me, she privately said, I think you'd be great with so-and-so. And she did that a few times, tried to set me up with different people in the group. Whenever I said, hey, I'm dating somebody outside the group, it was like, no, she's no good. So, why did I listen to that? Do I have to answer that? She was so influential. Yeah.
How did the leaders get money out of the group, and how often did they do it?
So it was tuition, we called it tuition, 300, people paid anywhere from $300 to $500 a month. Cash was collected by her minions, and they had a whole system of cleaning it and whatnot. And so Sharon lived a very luxurious life. She had a home in Bridgehampton.
When you say clean?
Cleaning it, laundering it.
What did they tell you the money was for?
Oh, we didn't ask. It wasn't for us to ask someone. I assumed it was going for rent for the spaces and and when I did see her wealth on display later on, I thought, it's okay. She gives so much. Why not? I can afford $300 a month. It didn't really bother me that much.
What if you couldn't?
Huh?
What would happen if you didn't have the money to pay?
They only
They didn't recruit you.
recruited people
Well,
who.
had
If
money.
you're already in, you've been in for a couple, let's say you're in already 10 years and bankrupt, something happened in your life and you don't have any money, what happens then? Do they start you on a program or?
People would lose their jobs and have struggles and whatnot, and it was not an excuse not to pay. So Sharon would encourage people to get like a waiting job or just anything so that they had money to pay. So, yeah.
How often did you meet and what did you do at the meetings?
We met twice a week, like from 7 to midnight at a loft in Lower Manhattan. And we would sit not unlike this with somebody, two leaders in the front talking about Gertrude Uspensky for, a half or 2 hours. And then afterwards, people would come in with personal questions about their life.
You said there were parties?
Yeah, so we had a Christmas pageant, which was a black tie affair, where we basically rebuilt the loft that we were in into this, like almost like a church. And mind you, all the leaders in the group, like me, we're Jewish. We're Jewish people. But I don't know, Gertrude is, it's esoteric Christianity and Jesus Christ. Christ is like the highest level of man. So, but we didn't have Hanukkah parties, we had Christmas parties, which was fine, I didn't care. It didn't mean anything to me. I'm not religious one way or the other, but it's just kind of ironic. But we designed the classroom to look like a church, and we had this, major banquet, and we prepared for like 2 months. They were fun nights. We had other parties that we had square dancing. We went on a boat. Different events every so often.
But just the one group would be.
Yeah. Sometimes we met some of the other groups, occasionally, but she liked to keep them separate.
The retreats would happen as you got higher up.
Oh yeah. So retreat.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we didn't get into that. That was something else. So in the summers, she invited a smaller group like 20 of the 60 who were in class to come to her ranch in Montana. She had a 100+ acre ranch in Montana that was built on slave labor of students. And it was about 10 cabins where we would stay. And Sharon had this huge chalet overlooking this lake, and it was right in beautiful area near Kalispell, Montana, on the Bob Marshall Forest, which is one of the biggest, national forests or whatever, state forests out there, filled with grizzlies, and it's just beautiful. And we were there, and we would work night and day, building, maintaining the property, and cooking and cleaning for her and for ourselves. And that was called Retreat. It was for 2 weeks or so. And I went every single year. And Sharon would hold 2 meetings a day. And it was very intense periods.
And follow-up to that is, how are you able to successfully keep your job and do all of the work that you were doing, all the retreats, all of that?
Right.
How was everybody able to do that?
Well, the retreat was a couple of weeks in the summer, so I was able to take off, in the summer. But I didn't sleep that much, Like nowadays, I go to bed at 9, pushing, I mean, really, I was up all night. We would be up late. I'd work late, Classes would go to 1, So I had a few hours of sleep. It's not very healthy, and it's also, I would say, that's another tactic of cults, is sleep deprivation. Yeah. And when we went to Montana, we barely slept. So we were working till we had dinners late. We had Montana. Have you been to Montana? It's like sunlight until 11 o'clock at night. It's amazing. But we would have dinners at 9 or 10, and Sharon would talk till 1 in the morning, and we'd be back in our cabins at 3 and up at 5 to start building and stuff. So, and I was younger then, so it was a little easier.
Wasn't it hard not to share anything, to keep this all secret inside of you? Didn't you want to tell your mom or your dad or your brother or sister? Or
right.
I don't know, I think they'd be kind of hard to, all those years to not be able to, tell somebody, I don't know, or even they might be asking, why can't you come Tuesday, Thursday, whatever.
Right.
Or whatever.
Well, you'd be surprised. Very few people hassled me about where I was on Tuesday, Thursday nights. I mean, so that was one thing. But as far as telling anybody, I had no interest really in telling anybody at all, because I just felt.
It was the right thing.
Yeah, I felt that I'd be betraying them, and it wasn't until the very, very end, just before I left, that I revealed it to somebody, and just talking about it to somebody, and a normal person who was not in the group, they were like, "This doesn't sound right. This doesn't sound right." I was like, "Yeah, I was wondering." No, it doesn't sound right. I was like, "Oh, okay," And then it kind of just all fell apart. And when I left, I knew, the day I left, after I left the next day, I knew it was a cult. I just knew it. That's what it was. And it was unbelievable. Now, again, nobody wants, very few. I've gotten actually a few people who are willing to talk about it. And, there's a couple of people who want to do a documentary about this. So I'm trying to get people who are willing to speak about it. Whether that happens is another story, because it's a lot of work, and I'm kind of ready to write another book about something else.
So I think the story is kind of crazy, but I had a friend many years, this was way back 20 years ago. And I remember this friend got very, very, very sick. He was Catholic, right? And he got so sick he was paralyzed for a year. And the mother told, she finally said, nobody knew what was wrong with him. So after a while, after a year being so he was paralyzed, the mother called all the Catholic priests, 3 Catholic priests, she was very Catholic. And they denounced everything, denounced this 3 days that they said in the house. You know what he denounced, but he was never a member? Scientology. The minute he denounced that, all the windows flew open, and got better. but he just had a small interaction with them. So for the rest of my life, this is like 25 years ago, 30, actually, 30 years ago. So every time I left, I was on a plane, and these people sat next to me, they were Scientologists. I was like, oh no, get away from me, I was freaked out the rest of my life because of this story. But anyway, but it was just like, he was talking about spiritual oppression, how you can just be in contact and you can just spiritually grow it out.
Yeah, no,
You can really, you know.
I'm fascinated by it. I mean, there's so much more that I could write and people do write about.
Yeah.
This, like, the psychology of it, it's really intense. I mean, sometimes I think I could just write about like 1 week of what it's like to live in this and the intense interactions that go on and what goes on in your mind when you're around other people who are in this groupthink and underneath an oppressive leader, and what it makes you think and say, and how your own common sense and rationality is so snuffed down, and it's acknowledged. Like, we would acknowledge our common sense and call it our enemy. So, like, if Sharon would yell at someone and say, or, you know, just say something outrageous, like, or tell somebody to sleep with someone, or I'm giving a very extreme example. It could be, let me give it another example. She might say to someone, well, the reason that, I'll give you one she said to me. I'm just trying to think of one that's good. Well, she used to say that everyone had a fatal flaw, and it was a privilege for a teacher, for a student to hear what their fatal flaw is, because most people can't handle hearing what their fatal flaw is, but the only way to overcome that flaw is to hear it. And so she said to me, she said, your flaw is that you're a baby. You're a crybaby. And if things don't go your way, you get very upset. Now, it's true. If things don't go my way, I get upset. I think most people feel that way. The only difference is that I'm kind of a big mouth about it, and I'm outspoken. And, I wrote a book. I mean, I'm a lawyer. This is just my personality. I'm outspoken. And I would challenge Sharon a lot. And it stuck when she said that, because I knew what she was talking about. My being outspoken is being like a big baby. Now, I would say this is not true. It's not true that I'm just saying what I think is correct. Well, no, you're coming from your enemy. This sort of life thinking of you just thinking you're standing up for something is really you being a baby. And so I came around to believe that. And then other people would believe it. And so, like, this kind of psychology is very oppressive, and it's goes on in so many situations I've seen in my life, where there's a power dynamic and people treat each other in a certain way that's less than empathetic and loving.
It just strikes me that she determined in you what could be a threat to the group and to her, and she chose to try to beat it out of you by causing you to believe that it was your fatal flaw instead of what could be her undoing.
Exactly.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. Smart. They're smart people.
Smart. Yeah, they are.
Yeah, they just project all this stuff.
Absolutely.
So what happened to you? What's going on with Sharon now?
So she died of COVID
Oh, good.
in 20. She died 2021. She lived in the Plaza Hotel in a $9 million apartment overlooking, that was purchased by her students. She died alone. She got COVID from her housekeeper, and she denied having COVID, from what I'm told, and didn't want to go to the hospital. She's buried in the Springs.
Did anybody take over for her?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
She had, in the last years of her life, she was 85, she had 3 different wills, and she kept amending them, and just like she did, she'd have favorites, oh, you guys are great, and then, oh, I love you, and, you know, she would do this, play favorites, and she did that in her will, and finally, you know, these 4 people were left the cult, the shares in the cult, 4 people, all of whom I know, and they lead it now, and they get the money, and there are people younger than you who are getting recruited right now.
Did you ever
Right now.
recruit someone, and if so,
No.
okay, you know,
If so, what?
would you feel guilty, or would you?
Yeah, I mean, I would feel awful. I mean, the recruiting was so deceptive that I couldn't do it. I've gotten people out. I've gotten a lot of people out. I feel good about that.
Is it common for members of cults to believe they're not in cults while they're in?
Yeah.
It is, because I've talked to people in cults, and they all say, or the ones I've talked to anyway, oh, we're not in a cult, we can come and go as we please, but meanwhile, they're paying tons of money, the people at the top are always wealthy. Is that the big sign of a cult?
That's a big sign.
Yeah.
That's a big sign. I mean, Scientology, very much, it's coercive.
Remember Bhagwan?
No, what was that?
Bhagwan, and he owned half of Oregon out on the west
Oh,
coast.
yeah.
Yeah, they all used to say, he'd have like 15 Rolls Royces and these Rolex watches, and they'd say, what difference does it make? You know, it's good for him to have that.
Yeah, exactly. Why not? Yeah, no.
They justified everything.
Yeah, they justify it all. And somebody asked about did you ask about the $300? Did I ever ask them why somebody asked me, did I ask them what they would do with the $300? I didn't care. I figured they actually said it was good for me to pay. That you don't value anything unless you pay. That's like what the mafia says.
Right.
I mean, it's like what they say, I don't pay you, you pay me. Like, oh, okay, right, And look, people want something. Everybody, we all want something. It depends about, how badly and if we're willing to look the other way for things, Like that investment, it sounds so good. And all right, so what? He was in jail. It's okay. Everybody else is doing it. And, this guy is smart. He's doing it. And,
On the other hand, you could say you were paying $300 a month for a sense of community.
That's
and
right.
You were getting something back from it, obviously, and it was fruitful for you in many ways.
Yes.
I guess that's kind of the difficulty. It's like a bad marriage, or
exactly.
You see that you're getting something that's feeling good, or something you're learning, and yet it's not right, or something is going on.
It's not black and white, and I couldn't write the book until I was able to answer that question. So the person who helped me edit the book, her name is Cornelia Channing. She's an author, part of Channing family, and she also a very bright young woman. That was the first. She said, "Well, why did you stay so long?" I was like, "Well, they had me brainwashed." I'm like, "No. Spencer, you're not clear." So I had to become clear. And you asked a question also, like, why did I stay? So it's a mixed situation. I tried to capture that. So
it's rough.
There was a lot. There were these friendships that were intense. Like I would just love these people, and they loved me, and they were like, I was isolated from the rest of the world, my other friends, because I came to believe that these were my best friends. And, friendships, we're really social creatures. I'm very social. These friendships meant so much to me.
That's a double life you seem to live.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I did read the book.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I thought it was really fascinating. But
Thank you.
there were a couple of scenes in there where there were these public shaming.
Yes.
And everybody in the group kind of piled on, like you said. And they were horrible scenes, and especially there was one out in Montana where the guy was just really weak in state, and everybody kind of piled on. Do you remember that?
The Montana one.
Yeah, and then I went to Montana, there was a guy who, I think he got injured.
Oh, Rick,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you must have felt shame about that? I mean, being one of the people
To beat up on him? That was a really memorable evening because we, let's see, he got really injured.
Yeah.
He almost got killed.
And he did go to the hospital.
Yeah, and he's okay. He was fine, but it was close. And Sharon blamed everybody for this event, even though it was none of our fault, except of hers, for having us do this stupid thing. A bunch of lawyers and, you know, guys in New York with soft
And the
hands.
machinery and all of it, yeah.
It was insane, but we did it, and she took no responsibility. She blamed us all. I didn't feel shame in that because I didn't feel that's not an incident where I felt that I jumped on him. There was plenty others in the book where I did jump on people, but that one, he was jumped on by her, and I think everybody assented to it. But I don't remember that. But I don't remember that being an incident really.
Yeah.
But there were others where people we just jumped on people, and it was a free for all.
And she.
That's the last class I went to was very much like that with the woman.
And they set it up that way on purpose.
Yes.
So that, you know, to bring out the worst.
It really felt bad to get it, and it felt worse now looking back to have stood by and been participating in that.
Then it sounded like.
See, I didn't really get it. Did you come away thinking? Let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see how shitty we all treated each other?
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
but she, she set it up that way.
Right.
To play everybody against each other.
Well, you saw like we were all assholes to each other. I mean, we were. I mean, we were terrible.
Manipulated to be that way, though.
I agree. Yes.
Yeah. I don't think that anybody was genuinely that way.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Some people
and the
were.
fight scenes.
The people
like
who.
those fight things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And but she was drinking a lot. Right?
Yes.
So did that escalate over the years?
That's what turned it.
Okay.
Yeah, and she had a drug problem as well. She had some members who were doctors and were able to get her things.
So did people stop believing what she was saying less as she would get drinking
Yes.
more? And,
Yes. A lot of people left. Well, there was a big exodus of people was at about the same time she started really drinking a lot and the drugs and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then I think she kind of cleaned up a little bit, but she was still far gone, and so much happened to her that, you know.
How old is she when she's on this show?
85.
She died when she was 85. She was in her 60s and 70s,
Wow.
60s and 70s.
Wow.
Big drinker.
Wow.
How did this affect you, like, legally? I mean, just between you and me, I hated law school too, by the way. But I going through all of law school, and now, everything else I'm doing legally. When I was put in that situation in Scientology, the reason why all the hairs stood up for me, which I think was because of law school, because I knew of certain laws, I saw certain things, and I was like, whoa, this is unconstitutional. This is actually like, you're actually keeping somebody, imprisoning them, and this is false imprisonment. And I was seeing all that because of my legal background. Did any of that kind of strike up to you of saying, hey, when we're doing this, this is actually, we're breaking the law?
He said no.
Not at all. Not at all. Afterwards, yes. During it, no. I thought we had a concept called clever insincerity. And Gurdjieff had this theory called clever insincerity, meaning that you could lie if it serves your purposes. It's called lying. It's called fraud. So you're allowed to do that. So if we knew people they were getting cash or other things, you know, we just looked the other way. I mean, there was an illegal thing that was going on that I became aware of, and I said no because they wanted me to represent them. So I did say no to something. And at the end, there were a couple instances where I talk about where I said no to things that I did think were illegal. But you know, there's a lawsuit against them now. There's going to be some more, and you know, there's some brilliant lawyers out there who are trying to help. Out there, really smart.
When you first went to the meetings,
Yes.
and you were told you couldn't talk to the other people, but you made friendships with the other people. What about your previous friendships, your friends from Long Island? Were they calling you up and going, hey, you know, going out on Thursday?
Yeah.
And you go, no, I got a meeting.
Right. So I began to lose interest in them because I felt that these other people were, you know, more interesting and, you know, more important to me.
Did you feel like you were evolving in the group?
Yeah, totally.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that was one of the pulls.
Yes, I definitely did. I thought was getting more confidence, at least for a couple of years, until it just kind of disappeared, really. But it was dependent upon whether I got approval or not from Sharon. So it was very limited. But I was estranged from my friends
Are
for
you
many
back?
years. Huh?
Are you back with them?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes. That's the happy ending, is that I went back and all these great friends that I had are, you know, still in my life.
Did you feel like when you were in the music, the band, that when you were playing with those people, you did that for a few years?
Right.
That gave you more confidence to be, you know, apart from Sharon at that point, or?
Well, that was early on. I stopped playing. I guess when I left when I was 52, I joined when I was 29. I think I stopped playing in the band when I was, I don't know, probably 40, something like that. So I really wasn't playing. What I got involved in, the community that I got involved in, that led to me, helped me leave, was swimming. I joined a master's swimming team, and I swim in the Y at East Hampton, and I swim outdoors as well. I swam around Shelter area a little bit. The north part and the south part.
Not all the way around there.
No, but I want it one day. It's a big swim. It's like 20 miles, I think. Yeah. Yes.
I just first of all want to thank you, and it's an extraordinary story to hear, and for you to be so open. It's remarkable, very moving, and just feel so much respect for what you've done and can only begin to imagine it. I just wanted to make the point that there are peripheral cults that surround us that are not nearly as dramatic as this. When in the 1970s, I was involved with a number of my friends were involved in something called objectivism, which was a theory of knowledge propounded by Ayn Rand, who wrote The Fountainhead. And it was very cult-like in many ways. It was not cult-like like this, but it was very cult-like. There was a person in charge, Ayn Rand. Everything that she said was perfect. If you liked the kind of music, that was the kind of music you had to like. So it was much lesser than this, but it was very cult-like. And I think that surrounds us a lot. And it's just, I think this really helps us open our minds to that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's an important conversation for people to have about us, you know, as a society, to have about common sense and thinking for oneself, being open, but also ultimately trusting oneself, and being discerning about it, and being aware that there are just charlatans out there who are really good at it.
Yeah.
You know.
And very convincing.
Very convincing.
In the case of Ayn Rand, she was a brilliant woman.
She was.
Brilliant books. She was a fabulously interesting woman. But there was this other dark side.
Well, everybody asks me about, you know, the cult of Donald Trump and whatnot. And, yeah, I mean, that's a big and a good comparison. And yet, you know, you could go on the other side as well. And you'll see there are plenty of people on the other spectrum who also have a, let's just say their motives aren't exactly pure, you know, and I don't know, I mean, it's very extreme, I think, with Donald Trump because of the way he manifests himself. But I think a certain, it's on both sides. It really is.
Does anyone have any more questions?
Anybody else?
No, we're all set. Okay.
Thank you.
There's some books here if anybody is interested.